Hi, I'm Craig Beatty, VP and Head of Research for Sit Down, and today I'm very pleased to be able to interview Michelle Kvello from Lantern Partners, and please welcome Michelle to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Michelle, well, we had a bit of a chat beforehand, actually quite a detailed chat over some nibbles. You've been an entrepreneur for some time and you've had a very strong and varied career. But before we talk about you and what you've done and your insights, can you tell us a little bit about what your organisation does?
Sure. So I founded Lantern Partners 12 years ago now. And Lantern Partners is a CFO advisory business, and we work with founder CEOs of startups and scale-ups. And we help them with the commercial and strategic finance advice. So usually the businesses that we work with, they have their tax accountant, they have a bookkeeper or maybe junior accountant within the business. So they've got the health and hygiene stuff sorted. But what they're missing is the commercial and strategic finance support to really kind of drive the business forward. And that's when we jump in.
Okay. And so what made you start this kind of business? Where did the idea come from? Take us back a little bit to start your career and what you did and what led you to this.
Sure. So I started my career many moons ago at PwC back in the UK. And I worked in the entertainment and media division as it was then. Stayed there till I qualified and then very quickly jumped out into industry. And I've always worked on the corporate side, very much in the commercial analysis, financial planning and analysis type divisions of finance, and primarily for media, marketing, technology businesses. So did that in the UK for TV distribution company and also Reuters, and then moved out to Australia, which was, I can't even believe it, 20 years ago now.
Straight out of high school.
Straight out of high school, obviously. And worked for Foxtel and Yahoo 7. But I always knew that I wanted to work for myself. That had always been something that was in the background. I just couldn't figure out how my kind of finance helped or kind of worked in that kind of environment. You know, people know what a tax accountant is. People know what, a bookkeeper is. But would they actually understand what the commercial and strategic finance advice was? But within the businesses that I worked with, because we were primarily doing the business partnering, I loved working with those areas of the business and kind of the business elements and helping them with business cases and investment strategies, that kind of thing. And actually, a lot of our initial clients were people that I had worked with within corporate roles who went to start their own business and knew what that kind of support felt like and knew how it drove their business forward. So really, that was kind of the genesis of the idea. Okay,
so it was kind of a gradual evolution of an idea, or was there one pivotal point? Was there one thing that you went, hey, I can make a business out of this?
Do you know what? What I've just described is probably the commercial reason for doing what I did. The real reason why I did it was I wanted somewhere to work that was sane for me. I was working within finance roles within corporate, and anyone that's worked within those types of roles know the kind of hours and the kind of pressure that is. And I was getting to a point in my career where I could see the roles ahead of me and the more senior roles and the more diverse roles, and I just didn't want them. And so I wanted to create a business where I could still do really interesting work, and I was still really ambitious, but do it in a way that made sense for me. So honestly, that was as much a reason for starting it as the commercial and kind of very business-driven reasons.
What is a fractional CFO? We talked about that term.
Yeah.
It's a relatively new term. Some people might call it a virtual CFO. Can you tell us what that really means and why that would be a different word to use?
Yeah. So fractional is a really interesting term that's popped up first in the US and the UK, but quite quickly came over to Australia as well. And anyone that hangs out on LinkedIn will see that fractional word popping up a lot. And it's not just fractional CFOs. Really, those fractional roles apply to all C-suite roles. I've even seen fractional CEOs, which is kind of a strange one as well. But really what it means is for a scaling business that founder run, so CEO is the founder generally, and they're getting to the point in the business where they can't do all of those C-suite roles, right? Usually the founder is wearing all of those hats from the beginning, and it gets to a point in scaling where that just isn't effective anymore. And so the benefit for those kind of businesses of bringing in a fractional C-suite is before you commit to a full-time C-suite role, because they're really expensive, right? And often for a founder, because that isn't their speciality, finance isn't their speciality, or marketing or sales, for example, they might not know exactly who to hire in on a permanent basis. So what they can do is take advantage of these fractional C-suite roles that are used to working in these ways with scale-up businesses and can come in and lend their expertise on a, cheaper than hiring a full-time resource, but with that real depth of experience to take the business to the next level.
So how does it work? Is it like a day a week or a month a week? Is there some kind of a plan you put together, and you start with, hey, it might be very intense, and then you're there for a little while, and just walk through what it might look like.
So the way it works for us is that the first engagement that we do with a new client is we do what we call an initial financial health check. And so we'll come in and we'll learn a little bit about the business, and we'll assess the business and primarily its finance setup through a diagnostic we've developed called the High Performing Finance Team.
Right.
And so we'll kind of assess it through this wheel of, how involved is finance in strategy? What are the systems you're using? What is the reporting suite? What exactly is the makeup of your team? And what is the business trying to do and trying to achieve? And so we'll do that diagnostic. There's a report that comes out at the end of it which gives the risks and opportunities both for where the business is now and for where the business wants to go. And then we'll provide some recommendations. Those recommendations can be quite broad. So sometimes we're working with a business for the smallest is probably kind of 10 to 20 hours a month. Less than that, we don't get to know the business well enough to really make an impact. And at about 3 days a week, we stop making sense from a financial perspective, right? But coming out of that initial financial health check, some of the businesses that come to us are really, and funnily enough, it's generally family businesses that have got this far, where they're ready to hire a senior finance person, right? It may not be a CFO, but it's a much more senior finance role than, an accountant or bookkeeper. And so for some of these businesses that we're assessing, that will be the recommendation, and then we'll help them scope that role. We're not recruiters, but we'll help them recruit in that person, onboard them, mentor them, and make sure that role's a success for the founder. So it can be a number of different things.
So in the end, your job is to get in there, make them successful, and then gradually get out?
Yeah.
How long will that process take?
It depends. So
in a perfect world, you'd be there forever, but
Well, no, actually, I say to all of our new clients, if we do our job right and you do your job right, you're going to outgrow us.
Great.
So with a lot of founders that we work with, they're looking to sell their business. And so when they do that, it's very likely to be a larger business. A lot of our clients sell to listed businesses, and they've already got their own finance team. They've got a CFO in there.
Yes.
And, that's success for us. Or they'll get to a point where the business grows to the extent that they need to hire in that permanent CFO. Again, that's success for us. But that can take a varying length of time. I think, most founders are very ambitious and kind of want everything to happen yesterday. And, for a lot of businesses we start working with, they're thinking on a maybe 3 to 6 month time frame. It invariably takes longer than that. Sometimes it's a year. Sometimes we've been with some clients kind of 3 or 4 years, and really it really is about helping them get to that next stage.
So, can you share an example of where the founder wasn't quite ready for you, and what did you do? And an example of where you had outstanding success. What are the factors that actually make the difference?
So the reason we actually mandate this initial financial health check now is to avoid those issues. Because what used to happen is that we would get a founder coming to us and they would say, okay, I have I have X problem, whether that was pricing or whether it was a particular business case or expansion stream. I've got this problem, I need you to sort this out. And then we'd get in there and we'd realise actually X wasn't the problem. They needed to fix a problem over here, which they hadn't seen because it's just not their area of expertise. And then it became quite difficult to manage those expectations sometimes because the founder's sitting there going, well, I asked you to fix this. Why are you over there?
Yes, that's right.
And so the initial financial health check really helped in terms of setting a real grounding base for both the CFO and the CEO. And the other thing that that process is really useful for is the relationship between the CFO and the CEO is so fundamentally important. And that's true in a corporate environment as well as kind of an SME or scale-up environment. And so that initial project really allowed both the CFO and the CFO to work together and see whether they could work together. Because those inflection points that we're helping the CEO through involves them doing things differently than they have done it up until now. And so you do need to really build that trust very quickly. And I'd say that's the difference between bringing also a fractional resource in and doing a new hire that's used to a more steady kind of corporate environment, is that you just have to do everything quicker and to really start getting traction. So yeah, those are probably the main things.
What about other stakeholders in the business? They may have a salesperson, they may have marketing.
Yep.
They see this person come in, what's going to happen? We're going to have new budgets, going to do targets, or someone's going to get fired.
Yep.
How do you manage the other stakeholders that aren't owners necessarily, but they feel like they've been part of this family company or whatever?
Yep. Again, it's relationships. With the CFOs that I bring into the business, the table stakes are really their technical qualifications and experience. I hire people in for their EQ and their ability to build relationships and build trust. And the other thing that we say to the founders is this role is really only going to be successful if we are part of the business. And again, I think that's the difference between fractional and virtual or outsourced kind of roles, is that we have to be part of the business. We will attend board meetings, we'll attend strategy days with the company, we'll attend senior leadership team meetings if they already exist. We become part of the executive team as opposed to someone that's just working with the founder, because to your point, that doesn't work. There are other stakeholders within the business, both internal and external. So again, there may be key shareholders that we need to engage with. A lot of what we're helping founders with is post a capital raise, actually communicating with their investors. Quite often for founders, they can get the money and then, they run off and do what they raise the money for, but they're not keeping the investors informed enough about what's happening. And that's the good and bad. And just getting into that regular kind of communication rhythm.
Okay, changing tack slightly, but still on the same train.
Sure.
Acquisitions, integrations, and mergers. Have you been involved in any of those? And they might pose a different challenge. What are those challenges?
Yeah, so that's what we do a lot of. Is more from the sale process and divestment of a business. So for the founders that we work with, quite often their payoff and also why they're doing this is to eventually sell their business, right? So we help prepare the business for sale, and we broadly kind of do that with this 3-pillar approach. The first one is around health and hygiene, which is the bit that most people think about when they think about preparing a business for sale. It's making sure your books and records are all intact. It's making sure you've got decent forecasts. You've got all the contracts in one place that you can put your hands on. So that's the first one. The second one is making sure that the business is ready for sale. And what I mean by that is that it's not founder-reliant. So very often with founder-run businesses, a lot points to the founder, and they're involved in a lot of the decisions, if not all the decisions within the business. And that's really dangerous in a sale process for 2 reasons. One, you're not going to get a great valuation for a founder-reliant business because an acquirer will see that quite quickly during the process. So if you're really going to get the valuation your business deserves, it's got to exist without you. And the other thing as well is that when a founder is going through that sale process, it's a really intense process. and they will have to step back from the business to a certain extent. And so if they don't have the operating framework within that business that allows it to function whilst they take a step out for a while, if the sale doesn't go through, then they come back to a business that's, much weaker than when they started the process. And that's soul destroying. Both your sale didn't go through and you've got a weaker business. Or the sale does go through, and very often you've got an earn-out based on the financial performance of the business after the sale. And so we've seen situations before where a founder has stepped out of the business and they are so involved in the sale process that their pipelines disappeared whilst they were in the process. And so they don't get the earn-out or kind of the money after that first signing that they should get because the sales have disappeared. So that's the second part of the process we work through with them. And then the third part is the part that a lot of founders underestimate, and that's the mental preparation for a sale process. Most founders are incredibly emotionally involved with their business. It's their identity, right? And I speak to founders all the time. They're like, no, it's just business. I'm like, okay, cool. But you are going to sit in a room at some point and someone's going to tell you, your strategy was wrong. Why did you do this? You're not making any margin over here. Why did you hire that person? And, it's going to feel a bit like someone poking your business baby and sort of saying it's ugly. And that can be a really kind of disconcerting process for a founder. So one of the things that we're also talking to them about as they're going into the process is, what's your support network like? We can support you internally. Hopefully you've got a really good legal team, M&A advisor that can support that part of the process. But what's your support network like outside of the business?
For example, I'm just going to go and play golf. That just won't cut it.
Yeah, it might.
What are you going to do? I'm going to improve my golf game. That's a standard answer for when people retire.
Yeah. And it's like retiring, right? What are you going to do when you no longer have this thing consuming you? And for most founders that sell, they will have to stay in the business for a certain period of time after they sell. And it's horrible going from being a business owner back to being an employee. There was a reason why you started your business in the first place, right? Yes. And so that can be a really unsettling process for a founder as well, after they've sold, working as an employee in the business, and the new parent making decisions that you wouldn't necessarily have made. So there is a real mental piece to both going through the process and then also afterwards as the transition happens to this new parent company.
Okay, so as part of your planning, you'd help them work out what their network needs to look like internally, externally. You might say, hey, you need a head of sales, you need a head of marketing, you need to bring those people on, or HR, and gradually let them devolve responsibility and dip in and dip out, but gradually pull back to the extent that if something happened to them, the business would keep running.
Yeah.
So if they can get themselves mentally and physically prepared for that and structurally, then that sets them up going forward. And that's why it takes more than the 3 or 6 months that they think.
Yeah. Well, we generally say to founders, if you're starting from complete kind of zero in terms of preparation, probably take you 2 years to get there. And we're also brought in by a lot of M&A advisors when they first talk to a business owner that wants to sell. And the M&A advisor kind of goes, well, you're just not ready yet.
Yeah.
Go talk to Lantern Partners. They'll help get you ready. And so it works for everyone, right? So, yeah.
Okay. Philanthropy and mentorship. You had a lot of background of actually giving back. Can you talk about that?
Look, for me, that was one of the really important reasons that I wanted to start my business, because I wanted to do more than just one thing. And part of that is about mentoring other business owners and also finance professionals at earlier stages in their career, because I know how much I benefited from people's generosity there. So that was really important for me to be able to carve out some time where I could actually do that. I also sit on 2 not-for-profit boards, one in the performing arts, which champions independent artists.
Which one is that?
Performing Lines.
Give it a plug, yeah.
So Performing Lines champions independent artists and particularly First Nations artists. And I've arguably been on the board for far too long with them. I've been on the board for 10 years. And they've gone through a lot of iterations. And for me, the performing arts is really important because it sparks conversations in a very different way through art and through artistic conversations that is really fundamental to our culture. The other board that I sit on is 10 by 10 Philanthropy. 10 by 10 Philanthropy was founded 10 years ago to encourage the next generation of philanthropists. It was started by someone who was then in their 20s, who wanted to give back but didn't know how, didn't have time. He was working in finance. He didn't have the time to do it. And it also primarily supports grassroots social purpose organisations that typically don't get the funding. 90% of charitable giving goes to big organisations. Very little goes to grassroots grassroots organisations. And so having this organisation which promotes both a way of giving and also gives a voice to social purpose organisations, again, really important to what I wanted, part of the hours that I have in my life to do. I like to think we do good through Lantern Partners, but there are also very many different ways of doing that.
So you're on a lot of boards, you've got your own company, you have your own life. How do you manage this?
I don't sleep.
Okay.
No, for me, it's...
Nap in the afternoon?
Yeah, very bad napper. I've always been a bad napper. Look, I think for me, that diversity keeps things interesting. I do need to watch my energy levels, though, because, I burnt out quite comprehensively in my corporate career. But even after, I think a lot of people think, well, I'll just leave that environment. I'll go into another environment and it won't happen again. The trouble is you bring you to the new environment.
Yeah.
And so
your personality doesn't change.
Your personality doesn't change. And so, well, unless you intentionally change it, it's very rarely your environment. It's how you operate in that environment. So that's happened to me again within business until I actually decided not to do it. And part of what keeps me energized in a healthy way is that diversity of interests and diversity of projects that I'm involved in. So yeah, I love it. That's why I do this.
One thing that entrepreneurs have in common is high energy and a high ability to want to contribute, and therefore they want to say yes. Did you find it difficult to learn how to prioritise and say no?
I am still pretty shocking at that because I find so many things interesting, but it's a discipline like any other, right? If you keep saying yes to the wrong things, you're not going to be able to have time to say yes to the right things. And if you keep saying yes and you fall in a heap, well, then you're no good to anyone. And I've got two daughters, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And, part of doing what I do and part of supporting women in the industry is showing them how things can be different. And so that's a really important part of how I try and manage my work, manage my business. Really proud to say we're 90% female staffed, and supporting women within the industry and the finance industry has a real gender equity issue. The industry is pretty much 50-50 male-female. Only 30% of key leadership positions are female, and only 10% are actually led by women. So having those conversations and, leading from the front, and particularly, 90% of our staff are female. They are all CFOs walking into organisations, and just by walking into those organisations in their roles, normalise females within the industry and within those roles.
We had a chat about your own staffing and your philosophy of hybrid work or work from home.
Yeah.
Personally, I find 24 hours is 24 hours. I'm productive when I can decide what to do in that 24 hours and when I want to do it and where I want to do it. The 9 to 5 bit's very difficult for me. I can do it. I find that's not productive for me.
Yep.
How do you feel about that and the whole working for, should people be coming back? Should they be going, case by case? What's your own philosophy?
Yeah.
We're going into a rabbit hole now, but it's very important discussion happening out there.
100%. And there's a book that was just published by Tim Duggan called Working Backwards, which talks to some of this as well. And there's a phrase in there, or kind of story he tells about, we've gone through this very weird environment during COVID when people were forced to work from home. And for a lot of people, that really opened their eyes as to, how life could be different working from home. The sharing of for people that have children and childcare, the sharing of that practical load, the sharing of the load at home, that changed a lot of conversations in a lot of households. And you can't put the genie back into the bottle. You just can't. And what I think it also exposed for a lot of corporates is that, there's some really bad managers out there that were only managing through visibility and through people physically being in the office. And that's not the only way to operate. But I also don't think that it's a complete free-for-all, right? Because we still have businesses, we still have to operate them. But how do you do that? And the conversation's got a lot more complicated. I think naturally as humans, we want kind of just the answer. Just give me the answer and I'll just follow that answer. But there isn't just one answer because we run very different types of businesses. We have very different teams. We have very different dynamics within those teams. So what works for one business isn't going to work for another business. And so you have to be very intentional about how you're going to get the best for your business, how you're going to get the best for your team, what works for your clients. And for us at Lantern Partners, I think I mentioned before that everybody works flexibly, both in terms of time and location. And so what that means is they'll work from client offices, they'll work from home, they'll work from, a co-working space, whatever works for them. Personally, for me, I can't work at home the whole time. It drives me nuts. I need to be around people. But, there are times when I need to do deep work. And so I actually... a week ago, literally went to a cabin in the woods to sit for 24 hours because I just needed to do a particular project that I needed no Wi-Fi to do. And so, you figure out how it works, but you've got to be intentional about it.
Do you find that this is a challenge when you're talking to an entrepreneur or a founder?
No, I think they get it.
They get it.
100%. Like the problem has, the startup founders that we work with, none of them missed a beat when, things had to go remote or, because their mindset is wired to, okay, we've got an obstacle. What do we do now? Yes. How do we navigate around it? Because startup founder, scale up founder, they've had to constantly navigate this. We're very lucky, I think, in this environment where a small business, because of the tools and platforms that are available to small businesses now, it's much easier for them to operate with a tech stack that typically, 15 years ago, 10 years maybe, it wasn't possible to do. And so they've really embraced these new ways of working. The businesses that found it much, much harder to adapt were the ones that still had a very embedded corporate infrastructure, both from an IT perspective and a management perspective. With some of those, they literally couldn't work for a week whilst IT got all their systems sorted out. Yeah. Whereas the founders that we're working with, they just went home and started working.
Yes.
So, half of them are already at home working. So
yeah, I was running my own business at that time and nothing changed for me.
Nothing changed. Nothing changed for us either. No. Actually, that's a lie. I have to say that
dealing with clients changed.
Dealing with clients changed, and that is something that we have had to focus on much more specifically post pandemic, because we used to be in client offices a lot more. So where we were working with a client a day or two a week, we would often be physically in their offices. Now, and it's not for want of being there, but like most offices, people aren't there half the time. You want to go in when there's critical mass, when you actually pick up those side conversations, have incidental discussions, but that isn't happening so much. So we work much more remotely than we used to. And so again, going back to the relationship piece, we have to be a lot more intentional as to how we build those relationships. So that has changed for us, and we've had to flex and work out how we do that differently.
Okay, well, we started talking about technology. That's how it's impacted workplace and how entrepreneurs work and how people communicate. What about impact on the landscape of financial management itself and financial services since you
Yeah.
started your career? How have you seen that?
Since I started my career with an abacus, and I was still kind of from the era
That's
of
what my
red pen.
cufflinks are. I have a
pens.
cufflink here that has an abacus on one
Oh,
side,
gosh.
and the other one has a silicon chip to show the whole.
You got balance.
Yeah.
Look, I started my career in audit when we were still ticking with red pens and green pens, and all of that lovely stuff. So it has changed so fundamentally. Just the level of connectivity and the tools that are available to us from a forecasting perspective. One of my team members, he used to work for Castaway Forecasting, and which builds three-way financial models. Just having tools like that, which you can use much more easily as a finance professional, even a skilled Excel modeler, building those three-way models in Excel from scratch. It's really pretty tricky. Not everybody can do it. But now we've got platforms which make that a lot easier. Mm-hmm. And we've obviously got, a lot of developments in AI and, how we use that to inform our forecasting, how we use it to inform our decision making. I think there's still a long way to go before it's very usable. And I think there is still, there's still a lot of things that we need to be careful about and cognizant of at the moment. So, for example, I had a client saying, should we just upload all our financial information into ChatGPT and then we'll be able to draw insights? And I was like, no. For the love of God, please don't do that. And so, but things move very, very quickly. I think there's there's a phrase that says we overestimate how much we can do in a year and underestimate how much we can do in 10 years. And so if I think about how we operated 10 years ago, how I operated, 20 plus years ago at the start of my career, it's so fundamentally different. The thing that actually keeps me up at night now with the business is, are we aware enough of all of the developments that are happening from a technological platform? Like, how are we getting our information in terms of what's new out there, what we can use? How much time are we spending actually investigating these tools and working out if they work for us? Because, not everything works for everybody, right? We're often working with clients again, we're not system implementers, but where they're using project management tools that need to integrate into finance systems, we need to have a seat at the table in terms of that implementation. And so, in terms of guiding clients through technology decisions, one of the things that we're doing is, at the start of that process, saying to them, you need to be really clear about what you want from this platform and go and find the platform that does that the best for you. Not because your mate told you that everybody's using this, not because, this is kind of what's getting the most marketing at the moment. What is the problem you're trying to solve within the business? Go find the platform that solves that the best. Mm-hmm. But then when you've identified that platform, you kind of have to do this 180, which says, don't try and make that platform do your entire process the way you've always done it. You need to now adapt your process so that you make best use of the tool that you've chosen. And so that's kind of how we talk clients through that, and, how we have to talk ourselves through it.
So internally, how has this impacted your own processes and systems? Are you using AI in any form? You've got your high performance evaluation.
Yep.
That's probably been around for a while. Has that morphed? Where do you see your organisation
that's more
going?
a process than a technology tool or a technology platform. That's a kind of diagnostic process that we use. Okay. But now I'm thinking about, how can I make that cleverer? Yeah. So I might go and have a think about that afterwards. But for us, particularly as a distributed team, and we give a lot of advice to founders, and then I have to remember I'm one of those founders as well, where everything's in my head. One of the big things that we did this year that we've just launched out to the team is an operating platform in terms of where we keep all our information, how we store our client information, how we standardise our processes, all of that scaling up stuff that we take all the founders through, but it's quite difficult to do that on your own business. And so
like the cobbler's children.
Yeah, exactly, right?
The worst shoes in the
town. Or the builder with the, half-built house. That's very much kind of a discipline I needed to implement within Lantern Partners this year. And so, we've had a number of technology demo calls with different technology providers to sort of see how we can best use those tools. I got a great example from, she runs a marketing business, but she says she sets aside an entire week every year. Beginning of December is her process, and she will just lock herself away and investigate all of the new marketing tools, technology tools. And so I'm like, that is a brilliant idea, because you actually need to carve out the time to do it. You're not just going to stumble across something. But that's why, it's also so worthwhile going to, conferences, to expos, and just actually find out what everybody's using.
Good. Look, we're coming up to the close of the interview, but I'd like to ask a question. Were there any leadership lessons you've learned, and what advice would you give to new entrepreneurs?
So part of what I do, as well as Lantern Partners, is coaching people coming out of corporate careers into consulting. And so there's a kind of a series of steps, and very much the way I frame it is because I left corporate with no plan whatsoever. The most planning I did is I had a budget called "What's the Worst That Could Happen," which was literally how much rope I had till I had to go back and get a quote-unquote proper job again. But the first thing that I tell people to do when they're considering stepping out of corporate into consulting, and this applies to anyone starting their own business as well, and within corporate, right, is why are you doing this? Like, what's your purpose? What is, when things get really tough, what are your guiding principles? It's no good just saying, well, I don't want that, so I'm going to jump over here. You've got to figure out what you're trying to jump into and really do that intentionally. And so that is the first and most fundamental thing I say to people starting their own business. It's like, why are you doing this? And be really clear about it. And then I guess generally from a leadership perspective, it's a very overused phrase, but just being authentic, because, I think particularly early in our careers, I know I certainly operated like this, is like, what do I need to project? Kind of like, what's this box, this image of competence or confidence or expertise that I need to kind of project? But if that doesn't come from a really real place, people figure that out really quickly, and no one's going to follow someone who's projecting something. So I think, and that kind of goes back to purpose as well, is just really kind of knowing yourself. One of the things I love about the founders that we work with is that they are all really self-aware, and they know what they're missing, and they are humble enough, I guess that's the word, to actually go, I don't know this. I'm going to find someone that does. And I think that that ability to not have to be all things and not have to know everything is really, really important from a leadership perspective.
Good advice. Thank you very much, Michelle, for your time.
So welcome. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thank you.